Alright people, Catfish Dave here. We are going to talk about catfish rods, what I like to use, what I need, what might be best for you. As a YouTuber, visual appeal helps me with views. I put out a video not too long ago, when you find the fish doubled up. It only got like 20,000 views, and it's got one of these dingy E-cats bent in the thumbnail, but you can see it's kind of dingy looking. It doesn't pop by the time you get the lighting and all off the water and the glare. This rod does not pop on pictures, right? Well, these people, they click because of thumbnails. Maybe a thumbnail combined with some nutty title, you know. But either way, I like these E-cats. They no longer make them. All glass rod, lightweight, extremely powerful, lots of backbone, will whip any fish in the water. They're no longer made. Biggest reason they're probably no longer made is because of all the other catfish rod companies that have came out with pretty rods. People want pretty. They want what looks good to their eye. The masses are what's going to make money. People sell rods to make money. And most of these rods are put out to appeal to the masses. It may not be the best performing rod that you can have out here. First rod I bought with color was this orange Hellcat from Catch the Fever company. Most of their rods I don't care for due to the power of the rod. They'll say they're heavy, and they're not heavy. And I'm not talking about just one company. I'm talking about they're all doing this. They're saying it's heavy, and this thing, well, you can take the tip of it and bend it down to here. Easy. That's not a heavy action rod. Hate to tell you. This one here is an extra heavy. This one here I can find use for. It is an extremely attractive rod, and so I was able to use this. I use this rod dragging straight behind the boat. I would use this rod if I was anchored in current and had just lines thrown out behind the boat. It would work good for those purposes. This rod here is much thinner and even lighter. This is a Chasing Cats rod. The guy's name is Jeremy Chase. Puts these out. He was wanting a rod that was stout like that Berkeley E-cat, lightweight like that Berkeley E-cat, but yet had visual appeal to please today's market. So he came out with this. Now there's a difference in the materials of these rods. The reason one is thicker and one is smaller but yet has more backbone. This rod, the thicker one, is a combination of carbon and glass. The carbon to give it some lightness, some sensitivity, with glass to help strengthen it. Glass is the toughest rod material they've ever made. You see these guys beating rods up against trees, slamming them in tailgates, blah blah blah, to appeal to a market. You better have some glass in your rod if you're going to do that. This thinner one, this Chasing Cats rod, it's an all carbon rod. You can break these. He will tell you before you buy them, you can break these. You don't beat these up against trees. You don't slam them in tailgates, car doors, truck doors. If you've got heavy sinkers and you're riding down the road, bang, 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 over and over by an 8-ounce sinker, hitting potholes, going down dirt roads, you can damage the blank, and eventually the rod will pop. The difference between the carbon fiber and rods with glass is this is just all performance, great feel, lightweight, will not fatigue you using it all day. The rods that have glass in them are going to offer more toughness. The reason I had to get an extra heavy in this was that was the only way I could get one of these it was stout enough for my liking. We're going to throw these out, catch some fish, and talk about catfish rods. That's the first time I've ever casted a chasing cat rod. Of course, I just got these in the mail last night. Very lightweight in the hands. It's like holding a bass rod. When it comes to catfish rods, you have to decide what you want. That depends on who you are, how you fish, how much you fish, the style you fish. Are you one of these guys that just anchor fishes, throws out in current, anchors the front down, the boat stays nice, and you just throw lines out the back? Are you that kind of guy? Are you a guy fishing reservoirs? Are you doing a lot of dragging, drifting, suspend drifting? Not all these reservoirs are created equal. Some of them are very deep. Sometimes you're dragging very deep, suspending very deep. You've got a lot of line out. The more line you've got out, the more distance between you and that fish, the harder it can be to set a hook. Now let me just say, you can take the most popular rod out there, glass rod that cost about $80, and anybody could catch a fish on that rod. If I had 3 of those rods on my boat right now, for the average size fish that I catch, I'm going to have a 90-something% chance of a hookup rate. Those smaller fish, their tooth patch is smaller, and it's much easier for the hook to find a soft part of that fish's mouth. The larger these fish get, the bigger that tooth patch gets, the wider it gets. They get so wide, an average 10 or 12-aught circle hook will not get behind it. Now you start having problems setting large hooks in large fish when you've got an extremely soft rod. In these East Tennessee reservoirs, we don't have the large fish they do down in Alabama, the James River, Kerr Reservoir, places like that. You catch a 50-pounder out of here, you've done something. A lot of pressure on these lakes. So the odds are that I'm mostly going to catch smaller fish, but I still gear towards the bigger fish. The lesser chances of you catching a big fish, the more important it is that you've got everything right, you've got the right gear to increase every chance possible of you getting a hookup when that monster hits. Not only getting a hookup, but landing that fish. It becomes much more critical. You get this large company mass producing rods that appeal to the beginning fisherman, novice fisherman, or just general masses. You get a bunch of those rods in people's hands all over America, you're going to see big fish caught on them. Because there's so many baits in the water with that brand of rod, they're eventually going to get a hookup on one of those big fish. Then they hold the big fish in the air and say, I caught it on this rod. It makes that rod look good. But here again, the company that has the biggest sales also has the largest amount of hooks with bait on it in the water across America. Small fish pulled a white bass head off. Did not have it all in his mouth. A rod company's #1 priority is to sell a product as much as they can and not have problems out of that product. So you get these companies out there making these colorful rods out of the toughest material they can find. Imagine selling 100,000 rods and 25,000 of them breaking on people. because they knock them up against the edge of their boat, let sinkers pound on them, set them up against the truck before they leave. They fall over, hit the driveway, trying to stuff them in maybe a car through one window, and tips bending and hitting this and that. You know, these rods go through a lot of abuse. That's what makes that all glass rod a popular option to sell, and also popular to buyers, because they can take more abuse. Most of these glass rods on the market, to me, as far as the performance of them, are garbage. Will they catch fish? All day long. Will you feel good doing it? I guess if you've never had a rod like that in your hands, you would think so, because you don't know no different. And if you're one of those guys that buys a rod because of color, so you can match it with this reel or that reel, you want to be able to afford to buy 20 of them. You see these guys with 15, 20 rods out the boat. That cheaper rod is going to be a lot better on your pocket if you're spending 80 bucks for a rod, as opposed to $120, $130 price range rods. I just use 3 baits when I'm dragging. Less hassle for me, less tangles at the end of the day, and I still catch fish. If I was anchored fishing right now, I wouldn't have no more than 3 rods out. That's just how I fish. So I'm not buying 20 rods. I'd rather dish out the extra $100 or whatever and have 3 rods out the back that I really like, have a lot of backbone. So let's explain why I need so much backbone dragging in this reservoir. We're right now over about 55 foot of water, which is a lot of line. Now the middle rod, which is the Hellcat rod, is softer than those two. And that's okay, because it still will stiffen up down towards the back. And I'm running braided line to make up for the distance from the hook to me. If you've got a lot of line out with mono, you're getting line stretch, which makes it harder to set a large hook in a large fish. When I'm pulling planer boards, now I need an even stiffer rod. Reason being, I'm still fishing the same depth, but now I've got even more line out to make up for the distance going to one side or other of the boat. Bottom line, there is more line out, and what's different between the planer boards and the rod in the back is going in a straight line. The line on those planer boards is going out at an angle and then back. So I need less stretch, more stiffness to make up for that extra angle in that planer board to have the same amount of hook set power as I do on that middle rod. If I'm fishing 55 foot deep right now, how much line do I have out? Way more than 55 foot. Even the rod that's not on a planer board is in 55 foot deep of water, but the bait right now is probably 100 feet behind the boat at an angle. That's a lot of line out. And then you've got even more out on the planer boards. We need some kind of hook set power at those extreme distances. This rod will bend, the top bends, but all this is nothing but backbone. These fish are a little beat up looking coming off the nest this time of year. Got this catfish slime all over my hands. When I cut bait, I got that mess all over my hands. Blood, oil, scales. They're making all these glass rods that's got this camo foam stuff, okay? And you grab that, and all that stuff just soaks into it. That's a decent handle design right there. It's kind of grippy and sticky, doesn't want to twist in the rod holders. Feels like it gives you good grip, but it's not that foam looking stuff that wants to absorb. Now it's one thing if you have black foam, okay? This is more like a black rubber. But that black foam is still going to absorb, but it's not going to look as bad as these camo colors with all this pretty in there, and some of it's even got white in there. If you use your rods at all, if you catch anything at all, those handles are going to look like pure garbage in a very short amount of time. This here, probably a little easier to keep looking nice. Both this rod and that Hellcat rod have the same exact grip. Whoa, he's on. I believe he stayed hooked. Yeah, he stayed hooked. That rod had a lot of backbone. I didn't even have to reel down on that fish, and he hooked himself just hitting it. The gizzard shad is the preferred bait today. Okay, we got a good one on the Hellcat rod there. Yeah, he's still on there. Let's get him. That was on the skipjack. That fish never got hooked. Got a little bit of slack in the line, and he spit it. He was pulling some drag. It was a nicer fish. I'm gonna guess probably a 30-pounder. Those bigger fish got that hard jaw, man. Yeah, he was pulling some drag when he first hit. I am running the same hook on all three rods, which is what they call a Dale's 12 from Dale's Tackle. They are an offset modified circle hook. They have a really good hookup ratio. Why did we miss that fish on that rod? We did not penetrate the soft part of his mouth. He was holding on to it with his teeth, and when he got good and well ready, he spit the bait. I can promise you, once you get a hook set with a Dale's 12, you work your butt off trying to get it out. That fish will not throw it if it sets. That hook simply did not set. The larger a catfish gets, the more your hookup ratio goes down due to that thick tooth patch. Top and bottom. That Hellcat rod has the best chance of getting a big fish because I've been out here fishing. They're hitting everything you throw. but all the big fish I've caught have been on skipjack. And the one good drag pulling bite we had today was on that rod. A stiffer rod could have possibly set the hook on that fish. It all depends on how the fish grabbed that bait. If that fish was just holding it in his teeth, it might not have mattered what rods you had. You still wouldn't have got hooked up. Those fish are strong. They've got strong jaws as well as a wide tooth patch. There is no rod, there is no line, there is no hook on the market, and I have even went through the trouble of running a stinger hook and even a stinger treble hook. And there is nothing you can do that will give you a 100% hookup rate out here. Nothing. There are pros and cons to every type of rod out there. That stiffer rod gives me a better chance of hookup. Now after the fish is hooked, that stiffer rod also gives me a bigger chance of pulling a hook out of a fish's mouth. The soft part of a fish's mouth is just what I said. It's soft. If you get the soft part behind the tooth patch, that jaw, teeth, bone will hold it in there. But if that fish is hooked in the corner on a really stiff rod and he pulls good and hard, he can literally tear that and you can lose the fish. Less chance of that happening on the Hellcat once the fish is hooked. Guys running too stiff a rod with braided line and not having their drag loose enough are going to pull some hooks. They will even break some lines on some big fish. There we go. They are hitting extremely hard today. Okay, this is a bigger fish than what we've caught so far. And this is where this type of rod shines a little more. Once the fish is hooked, it absorbs a lot of the punishment after hookup. Not a monster, but a nice fish. Not as big as that first one we lost, but the skipjack has been getting less bites this whole week, but I wanted to have it on one rod because it is catching the biggest fish this week. Oh, thicker, heavy fish right there. Good head on it. Let them see you, brother. You're on video. All right, y'all, I'll explain hook sets and why people miss big fish and why you would want a stiffer rod in certain situations. There's 3 places you want that hook to set. Left side of the mouth, right side of the mouth, or behind the jawbone on the bottom. If that hook wants to stay on the top of the mouth, it's hard all the way across the top, even behind the tooth patch. That's where hook sets become extremely difficult. The suspended bait bite, your monster catch rate's going to go down. You'll catch all the small fish you want, but the true monsters, we're talking fish over 70, are going to come off way more on a suspended bite like that. The reason is your bait is straight down in the water like this. The fish is swimming in this position, and when he bites down, this hook is in the top part of the mouth. That's the no-no spot. That's the spot that if you're going to get a hook set, you better have a heavy-duty rod. You get one of these rods that just doubles over like the Ugly Stick commercial, you're going to miss that fish. If that hook doesn't slide to the corner, you're in trouble. In that situation, with very large fish, you want a heavy tipped rod. The fish you will lose the most of on a suspended bite would probably be a flathead, because they don't want to swim away from the boat. They'll hit, you'll see that rod bend over and it'll just stay straight below the boat. A really big blue cat will do the same thing, but they'll tend to dart away from the boat after they're hooked, which can turn or pull the hook into the softer part of the mouth. When you're anchor fishing, when you're dragging, the fish tends to hit and swim away from you. Even if it's at the top of the mouth, has a tendency to pull it over towards the corner. I bought these E-Cats mainly for the suspended bait bite. Of course, they don't make them anymore, which is why I'm looking into other rods that are attractive for video, that are good on a suspended bait bite. I don't want a soft rod for that. Here again, you're going to hook 99% of the smaller fish on the soft rod. It's the large ones I'm talking about. That rod, chasing cat rod, could be the rod for that job. We'll just have to see. This is my first time with them out, you know. Plenty more fishing to do. And no matter what happens, all 3 of the rods look better in the thumbnail than that. You see that? That used to be white. That's how nasty your hands get. If you're catching fish, your gear is going to look like crap. So don't buy a rod just because it's pretty. Another smaller fish on the white bass. Jeremy says you can't high stick these rods, but I'm not going to high stick it. But I am going to boat flip that fish. Yeah. That's what a Dale's 12 looks like. It is offset, modified circle. They do have a good hook rate. Once you get the hook in, the only bad part is getting the hook back out. The same guy that's got the Chasing Cat rods, he's got his own terminal tackle website. He sells the rods on one website called Chasing Cats, but he's got another website called Cat Call Tackle. He sells these spooks. They're a dual rattle. They're not the cheap one rattle kind. And what I like about this over every spook I've had so far is they don't look painted. It looks like the color is actually down injected in the plastic itself. It looks like something that will never lose its color. A lot of these other spooks, the paint gets all knocked off them. After a while, you just got this plain looking blank. These look extremely durable. You can find those on Cat Call Tackle online. We got a smaller one to hit the skipjack. Smaller fish on the skipjack. You can see how much this Hellcat bent even with that small fish. That's all the bend you want. If you're fishing for monster fish, you don't want no more bend than that, because a monster fish will bend this way more. Lots of these mass-produced catfish popular companies, they're claiming heavy action when it's not. This says it's an extra heavy. To me, that is medium heavy. It's not stiff like a snagging rod, which would be extra heavy. To me, that is a medium heavy action rod, although it is rated at an extra heavy. And it's just not this rod. There's plenty of other big companies out there that are claiming heavy, and it's not heavy. That right there is closer to heavy, yet still has a tip on it. Those Berkley E-Cats, you could call that a heavy action. If I was going to rate this rod, I would call it a medium heavy, even though it's way heavier than what some of these other people are calling medium heavy. They're just not rating them right. If a small fish can bend it, you know a big fish can. Here again, bend can be your friend in certain situations. Too much bend, you're just working yourself to death for no reason, trying to get a fish in. That is a Demon Dragon brand of spook, and as you can see, it has an exterior paint. And don't get me wrong, it's a nice rattle. It's got more than one. And the finish on these is way better than some of these cheap ones I bought. I bought some of these, the paint was knocked off them within a week. This does have some scratches on it now. They're still good. But Jeremy's rattle from Cat Call Tackle, it didn't look like paint, man. It looked like it was infused into the plastic. Like it's always going to look like that, you know. What that rattle does, keeps my bait up off the bottom. It adds noise. Fish are attracted to noise. Guys say, well, it's cheaper to use a peg float. It sure is. Your peg float isn't making any noise, and sometimes the noise makes a difference, sometimes it don't. But sometimes I know it does. And the thing about the peg floats is every 2 or 3 fish you're having to cut your leader and put another float on, or unless you've got the slotted kind, you just keep putting floats on over and over and over. I will use this thing for a month if it don't get hung up, 6 months if it don't get hung up. These are a lot more expensive. They're just way more durable than a peg float. And if you think about it, that's an attractant. It's a fish lure without hooks, man. I've seen big cats get caught by bass fishermen throwing artificial stuff. That in itself looks a lot more realistic than a peg float. Depending on how clear your water is, how deep your water is, will depend on how much difference that makes. I have seen where the color of this made all the difference in the world. I kept having one rod that got hit over and over with big fish on this lake during the winter, and I kept trying to figure out why it was, and so I put the same spook on all three rods. All three rods started going down. It was actually the color. It was a clear lake. It was in the winter. Even the color can make a difference. Sometimes. Again, people selling rods, they're in it for profit. Which rod has the image of the best rod out there? The company that's putting out the best marketing. These big companies, they use people. They use people for profit. They offer incentives. They get all the social media stuff going. They offer cash awards for biggest fish of the week, or bigger cash awards for state record fish if you catch a state record fish. Creates a lot of interest in that particular rod company. But the person that's really benefiting the most is the rod company. He sold more rods because now guys are buying them to try to catch a state record so they get that big check. And even though very few state records are caught, when they are on these rods, out of all the thousands of guys out there every day, when it happens, that guy now holds up his state record fish and says, I caught it on this rod. So yeah, they paid him this much money for catching that state record fish. But then they post that pictures, and he posts pictures everywhere. And every time they catch a fish, they say, I caught this fish on that rod. There is extreme power in advertising. Extreme power. That's how I make so much on YouTube. Because companies can play commercials, and there is extreme selling power in those commercials. Those ads influence mass amount of people to buy that product. It is the same thing with these rods. Guy catches the state record on that rod, everybody wants to buy that rod. So even though the company paid this guy, the company came out way ahead in final sales. I had an unofficial deal with Mad Cat's rods for a while, and there was nothing official about it. You know, he sent me a bunch of rods, and I used them. I caught fish on them. I caught good fish on them. Here again, any rod will catch a fish. I sold a ton out of some Mad Cat's rods. The actual cost and materials in those rods wasn't that much money compared to what I actually sold in total numbers. I was never happy or satisfied with the soft, cheap glass rods. Never. I caught fish on them. I got them for free, but it wasn't my pinnacle of rods by any means. Here again, a fish has four sides to its mouth. The top, the bottom, the two sides. The two sides, you've got a real high percentage of hookup. The bottom, it drops a little bit because of the tooth patch, but if you get behind that tooth patch, that's a very secure hookup. But the top part is a no-no. It's all bone. Bone, cartilage, either way, the bone or cartilage is way harder than the soft tissue. Now, does it take a softer rod to penetrate that hard bone or cartilage, or a stiffer rod? That's kind of a common sense question there. As this fish becomes larger, that bottom tooth patch becomes even larger, making it less likely to get a hook set behind that tooth patch. Now the most likely places you're going to hook that big fish is here. So basically your hookup went to about half of what it was before on that much larger fish. That is why I want stouter rods on my planer boards, stouter rods on my suspended baits. The guy that made this rod in my hand, the Chasing Cat rod, had the same vision in mind as I did for a catfish rod. It is not a glass blank. You have to be more careful with it. This blank was designed to increase hook sets on suspended baits or baits far out. It was designed to increase hook sets, period, just because of the high-end backbone. Got a hook set on him. That Hellcat rod is made by a company called Catch the Fever. The first rod they launched was Big Cat Fever. They had a Facebook page, Big Cat Fever. They were the first company to get really big time by the use of marketing. They were jacking guys up with forklifts on these rods, which helped, putting videos of stuff like that out. But it was the key players. It was the actual fishermen that had these rods in their hands over big fish waters that made the company what it is. A guide out of Lake Gaston over in the Carolina, Virginia border area, he caught 2 state records within a 24-hour period on that company's rod, Big Cat Fever rod. That was huge in promoting that rod. He had a guide service on a lake that was full of big fish at that time, and he was constantly posting pictures and advertising Big Cat Fever. They had good marketing. The rod was a cheap glass blank, bent like a noodle. But if you put this rod in enough hands over big fish waters, it's eventually going to happen. I might not can get a date with Shania Twain, but if 1 million guys ask her, she's eventually going to go out with one of them. And that's what happens with a lot of these rods. They get in enough hands, this stuff happens. Good hands, good waters, it happens. Any rod can catch a big fish, period. That fish gets hooked in the soft part, it's game on. You can get that fish in. Enough people dropping baits in the water 24 hours a day all over the country in the biggest big cat waters of America, it's going to happen. The more people that these companies get behind them, and the more rods in these people's hands, the more that's going to happen. But again, it's the fishermen that really made those rods what they are. I sold a ton of Mad Cat rods, and when I quit using other rods, people got all upset. Well, I bought those rods because of you. I was good for Mad Cats at the time, but Mad Cats is so big now, they don't need me anymore, you know. I'm pretty sure at the point I'm making this video, they are the #1 seller of rods by what I see in people's boats and what I'm seeing posted on the social media. They have the top sales. How did they do it? They basically took what Catch the Fever was doing and they put a bunch of color to it, added an extra guide. They made all these flashy colors. They made all these fancy names. And every week, a new rod would drop with a new color and a new fancy name. Catch the Fever, they kept it more simple. They brought out their original rod color. They fixed a few issues they had early on, like guides and stuff. And when they got a real dependable product, they just stuck with it. So Mad Catch was appealing to the eyes of the masses, the eyes. Rod materials, same stuff, you know. Different color, different look. I think they added an extra guide on the Mad Catch rods, which helps stiffen them up a little bit, the extra wrap, the extra guide. Still just an old glass, cheap rod. You can catch fish on them. You could catch a state record on it. It's been done. What do you want when you fish? Are you fishing for a color? Because your reel matches your rod? Because this handle is pretty? Because it's going to look like crap. If you fish like I do, it'll look like crap the first week. All those fancy colors out here in the sun and rain are faded, and they look like crap in a year. That's if you're using the rod. If you're one of these guys that they just sit up on the wall and you catch 2 fish all year, they'll probably stay pretty for a couple years. I'm not one of those guys. My rod is a tool. I'm not worried about the color. I was worried about color for video purposes, not for mine. That's why I originally went with an E-Cat. They don't make it no more. I don't care who likes what rod. I don't care who likes what color. This rod's a tool to me. The high-end carbon rod, like that Chasing Cat, one of the original guys to bring those out was a guy named Justin Fricky. He was originally with the Slime Cats, who were doing glass rods like everybody else, only they had the color green, which caught everybody's eye. So everybody ran to that rod for a while. But when he left that company, Justin wanted to experiment with different things, come out with a rod that was actually sensitive, that actually had backbone, that actually felt good. And so he started coming out with these carbon material rods. Supposed to be a form of graphite, supposed to be tougher, supposed to be stronger. Very lightweight, very sensitive, very high in feel. Those rods were called toughest freaking rod. I bought a rod like that for myself that was $600. The reason it was $600, the blank was from the UK and it was hand wrapped and put together here in the United States by a guy that's got all our expensive bills like we do in this country and a family and kids to feed. That's why that rod was $600. All these big Catfish rods, they're coming from China. But I will tell you that you can get the same lightweight, the same feel from these guys for, I think most of these guys are wanting around $120. Close. It's over 100. It's not 200, but it's around 120. I could be off $10, $15. Typical glass rods, they run $80 to $90. That Hellcat rod was a good penny over 100. It is a combination of the carbon, but also I believe has enough glass in it to where less likely to break if you drop it, knock it up against something, although no rod is indestructible. I don't care if these guys, what kind of videos they make with them, no rod is indestructible. The glass rods, cheap rods, are the most indestructible. They also give you the least performance and feel. You get a rod stiff like that with braid on it, and a big fish starts doing some crazy stuff, some novice might just let go of the rod or get the rod snatched out of their hands. You feel a lot more on a rod like that, you know. Those guys are better off with the cheap glass rods, you know. If it goes overboard or whatever, hey, easy to replace, you know. But if you're a solo guy, if you don't need free rods, I bought that Hellcat. I actually paid for the Chasing Cats, not full price, but I covered his cost. I'm not endorsed. I'm just talking about the difference here in rods. We are hooked up. I'm feeling every little head shake on this rod. Another East Tennessee blue catfish. We're going to try to boat flip one with the Hellcat. Yeah. There's that slime. Makes your gear a mess. Some guys say, well, I like those flimsy rods, I want to feel the fight. I'm just going to tell you, you feel the fight way better on graphite than you do on glass. That glass rod is doing a whole lot of bending, but you're not feeling it like you are on a carbon rod or a graphite rod. The glass is just absorbing it. You're not feeling it. It's just, the rod is soaking all that vibration and stuff up. You want to feel the fight, you go with a lighter graphite or carbon rod. That's a heavy duty one. That's meant for the monsters. You want to feel a fight, go with a real light carbon. Now if you're one of the guys that wants to see the rod bend, then you get a rod that bends. But that's not the same as feeling the fight. Are you one of these guys that spends $80,000 on a catfish boat, now you're so broke? You want 20 rods that all match on the boat and reels that match, but you can't pay over $100 for the rod now because you spent so much on the boat? Those cheap glass rods are for you. You know what I mean? I only use a few rods. It's what I like, less trouble, less line tangles. I don't have to catch as much bait. I still catch plenty of fish. Benefits of some of these bigger companies, Catch the Fever, Mad Cats. You can get on their Facebook page. They've got all the apparel, the different shirts and all the stuff. You get to say, I caught this fish on this rod and share it with all these people. You get to do that on those bigger rod sellers like that. If you're fishing because you want the rod to be a certain color, you know, and you don't care about the rest, get one of those rods. Any rod will catch a fish eventually. You drop thousands of them in the best lakes and rivers in America, you're going to see it all the time on social media. If these companies know color is going to sell a rod, they're going to make them as colorful as they can be. Catch the Fever was the first huge company, and I mean huge, okay? Between the fishermen using the rods, the waters they were using them in, as well as the marketing by the company itself, they got huge. You had another company come along that took the market by storm. Why? Because they were selling the same kind of rods, only they put a cool name on them, like Slime Cat, and they were green. Catch the Fever was just straight up colors, white, black. Slime Cat came out with green. Caught people's eyes at the fishing show, all over. Next thing you know, there was this huge Slime Cat mafia, basically, I call them, you know. All these people were getting rid of their old rods and buying Slime Cat rods and wearing the Slime Cat shirts. The green got them. They were still using a glass rod. Same old metal reel seat as all the other companies, but it was green. Mad Cat's come along and said, hey, you know what? If the color green done all that, let's try this color. Boom. They kept putting the colors out. Boom. A guy would buy this color that he liked so much. A month later, they come out with a color that he liked even better. So he tried to sell that to get that color. And colors were selling rods. Selling the same thing that what Catch the Fever started out with, only it was colorful. Was it any better at catching fish? Not a bit. It's basically the same product with a different name and a different color. They got huge. They got all the social media backing, cult-like backing, that if you say anything about this rod, you've got hundreds of people trolling you. Which is why I got away from all that, you know. So, you know, are you a fisherman or are you a fad fisherman? Now, as far as the cheap glass rods, the color rods, the skittle rods I call them, they're tough. I've never heard anything bad about Mad Cat's customer service. That's one thing I can say about that. I won't mention no other companies when it comes to the customer service part, but Mad Cat's does have good customer service. As far as I know, I've never heard nothing bad. You ever have a problem, they'll get you another rod. And here again, you did not pay a lot for these rods, you know. I think around 80 bucks is what I want to say. Much cheaper than the carbon rods or the carbon blended rods. Now, we've spoke about the three original glass rod companies, Catch the Fever, Slime Cats, Mad Cats, and don't get me wrong, there's a whole lot more. But these were the guys that made it really mainstream, okay? You got guys like me, you got guys like Jeremy that put that rod out. He's got a lot of friends, and we all talk about what we want in a catfish rod, okay? Justin Freaky from Slime Cats, he put out that TFR rod, carbon rods. He's got different rods of all types. You can get cheaper rods, but he was the one that really started pushing the carbon stuff, the lighter weight, the higher end feel. And I actually got one of those rods in my hand when I was over in Virginia, and it felt like my $600 hand-built rod. My glass rods that I keep the 8-ounce sinkers on, bang, 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 up against the rods all day long. You don't want to do that with the carbons. When I get done dragging, I'm going to take those sinkers off them. You don't want to bang them up against the edge of the boat. Bottom line, for that kind of performance, you do have to sacrifice some durability. There are pros and cons to that rod, to the cheapest glass rods out there. The cheapest glass rods out there have the potential to catch a state record. Those carbon rods have the potential to catch a state record. How many people will pay for that extra price? You know, I can tell you it's probably never going to reach the masses. The masses like cheap. The masses like color. The masses like to do what they see everybody else does. But there are guys out there like me, and guys that spend a lot of time out here on the water, do this professionally, just do it constantly as a passion, that are going to fall in love with the higher end feel. Those rods are light as a feather. You feel every movement, they're sensitive, they've got backbone, they're going to lift. You don't want to high stick them, but you really don't want to high stick any rod. There's another company coming up that's going to be putting out a carbon rod, and I'm going to be getting my hands on that probably in the next month or two. I've been out here and I've caught thousands and thousands of fish. I caught a fish that we weighed over 100 pounds. The biggest on my video is 82 pounds. I've caught more fish over 40 pounds, 50 pounds than I can ever remember. I've done this, and that's living in East Tennessee. You know, if I lived on the Mississippi, Kerr Reservoir, James River, wouldn't be no telling what I would have caught. But I live here. I still enjoy what I do. And even though we don't have the number of monsters that some places do, when that fish hits, I want every opportunity at him. I want to be ready. I'm always fishing for the big fish. Always waiting on that one big bite that could happen at any time when you're catfishing. I spent a little over $10,000 on a used boat so I can have higher end rods and reels. The boat still floats, it still catches fish. The chasing cats, the hellcat, they have color, they have eye appeal, but it's in a more professional look to me and not so fad, skittle looking. Those guys made a lot of money selling those rods with those colors. I'm not out here to look at colors, I'm out here to fish. This is a video. There was some fish in the video. That makes it a fishing video. This is Catfish Dave with another one, signing out.